fiery meteorite flying straight to the building, and the system did not understand what they were checking here. This meteorite crashed into the thickness of the earth, destroying everything around. The protagonist grabbed his stomach and began to sneer maliciously. The knight looked at his sarcastic smile behind him. The brown-haired man looked back at his knight with disdain and asked about his expression. Xavier explained that he did not think that the master had gone crazy, to which the protagonist simply responded in kind. Lloyd immediately opened his eyes in shock when he heard that Master Corgidus and 30 other dwarves had arrived. The development of their apartment complex is directly dependent on the development of cement, because everything is much more complex than building a statue or a suspension bridge, and their knowledge is not enough to build an apartment complex. The protagonist bowed to the crowd of little dwarves in greeting. He showed a drawing of a concrete mixer on a piece of paper with a malicious grin, which he considered an incredibly valuable piece of equipment that helps mix and maintain the quality of cement and also prevents the cement from settling and prevents foreign components from getting into the texture. The old man with a slight frown said that it was rude, because they came all this way and instead of offering them a cup of soup, they are immediately given orders. Lloyd held the drawing in his hands and with a smile said that he had a lot of ideas on how to meet the master of Corgidus. The brown-haired man with a malicious twisted face looked out from under his brows and said that he believed that there was nothing better than to present him with the project plan first. The master snatched the blueprint of the buildings from his hands and went forward with the workers because the long-awaited construction project had finally begun. Lloyd and the knight stuck their tools into the ground. The protagonist stuck his shovel into the ground, from which heat emanated. Suddenly, Peepadong burst in. At this time, the hamster was spinning a wooden barrel of cement. At this time, the orcs were furiously squeezing the iron bars. It was a whole flock of green orcs who were preparing the reinforcement, because now it was possible to pour the cement. Bayern at this time recorded the action of Lloyd, who was pouring cement in a box and said that you can't just pour it like that, because you need to watch the edges and reinforcement so that there is no air left inside them. Lloyd realized that the level was rose and now it was necessary to summon Bebung. A huge chipmunk immediately appeared, who was storing all the things. At this time, Belle smiled happily. At this time, the chipmunk grabbed his cheeks and smiled joyfully, being happy. White clouds floated over the mountainous terrain. The protagonists, together with their comrade, looked at the huge frame of the building. Lloyd held the shovel and looked back at Bayern, asking him if they could cope without him, to which he agreed. Shaitan stared intently at the frame of the building and realized that now that everyone understood their tasks, it was time to take care of other things that required his attention, namely, the problems with the insulation of the heating system. He imagined a huge factory installation from which steam was coming, because the heating system of the gold mine complex functions thanks to a steam boiler, and water boils in the central heating room, then the steam is distributed throughout the building through a pipe system. It was a long system of pipes where steam entered in any direction. It was a small battery in the corner of the room, because they were connected to them. This is how the heating process is carried out. Suddenly the protagonist became slightly embittered and realized that there was another problem. He imagined the colors of the rainbow on the background of the thermometer, realizing that the higher the pipes go, the less heat they give, and the top floor is literally deprived of heat, because he tried a lot of ways to solve this problem, but came to no success. He sat at his desk and drew various drawings, throwing out one after another because he did not sleep at night, trying to find a way out and trying to understand whether it would be possible to make the right insulation, because he forgot what was in the novel and wanted to find some clues. He held his head and drew drawings with a pen. He left a certain inscription with a pen on paper. He immediately smiled maliciously, baring his teeth, and found a solution. He remembered the moment when an enraged dragon growled angrily, because it was the episode where Xavier fought a monster. It was a bloodthirsty dragon that emitted fire from its mouth because it considered the knight a weak human creature. This dragon emitted a powerful stream of fire towards the knight, because it was a monster that does not know any other words except for human creation. But no matter how strong a sword master he was against the dragon, he could not stand, but Xavier was so close that he felt the dragon's breath. His silhouette was covered with his hands from the hot flames. He looked angrily through his helmet and fire. At this time, the dragon opened its mouth and was about to release another flurry of fire. This knight stretched out his hand, standing in the fire, and did not even move. It was a purple magic tree with glowing foliage, because it was all thanks to the armor that was soaked in the resin of the village of Valencia being the best in the world insulated. At that moment, Lloyd approached this tree and touched it together with his assistant. The knight was carrying a backpack and looking at the main character, who was walking ahead, and said that they had been on the road for 2 days and was trying to figure out where exactly he was planning to get the insulating material. The protagonist replied that in the eternally shining forest where the elves lived, he could get some resin there. Then the brown-haired guy looked back with displeasure, seeing that the knight had started to leave. The blue-haired guy looked back at the gentleman with disdain and reminded him that elves really hate people, because they are the race with whom it will not be possible to negotiate. The protagonist raised his eyebrows in bewilderment and realized that in the novel, it was Xavier who made friends with them and received armor as a gift and told him to go back. He wanted to go further. Xavier, displeased, nevertheless followed his master. The knight closed his eyes and said that no one had contacted this race for the last 500 years and tried to understand how Lloyd would convince them. The brown-haired man looked at the knight in surprise and did not understand what was being discussed. Then the protagonist said with a mocking smile that the knight was stupid. Xavier looked at Lloyd with displeasure, who said that they were not going to negotiate. The protagonist opened his mouth wide in a malicious smile and said that they were going to rob them. The knight looked angrily through his bangs at the master and realized that he no longer wanted to be his knight. These were the snowy mountains under the night sky. The protagonist walked with the knight through the magical forest. They walked together along a forest path that was surrounded by magical plants. Lloyd looked back at the knight, who closed his eyes and told him that very soon they would enter the ever-glowing forest, because it was only a short time left, and he had heard that the elves felt a connection with the forest, so he asked the knight to be as quiet as possible. Xavier closed his eyes and began to put his hand to his face. He immediately sneezed and covered his nose. Lloyd looked back at the knight and asked him what he was thinking. Xavier noted that he was simply sneezing, and it could be seen. Lloyd stated that he knew when people sneezed and stated that he didn't have to seem cool. The knight, his face illuminated by the shining light, looked through his bangs and simply said that he was handsome and would look cool no matter what he did, because it was a feeling that he would never understand even if he lived his whole life. Lloyd looked at him with disdain, raising his eyebrows, noticing his ironic answer. Lloyd continued to look at him with disdain, while the system laughed at him because he had received emotional damage. The brown-haired man twisted his face, baring his teeth, looking at the knight, who called him a sword master, and he should restrain himself because they could not control some physical needs. The protagonist replied that he could not even restrain his urge to go to the toilet, and why would he do it? So that later he would suffer from constipation. While Lloyd was making a face, the knight scratched his nose and smiled. Xavier shook his head and stretched out his hand, saying that they needed to switch to this whole toilet topic because they couldn't compete face to face, and called the gentleman funny. The main character, with a grin and a twisted face, swung his fist. He began to deliver numerous blows to the knights, who were cold-bloodedly parrying them. Then Xavier put his hand to his stomach, which began to shine because he was in a very good mood. The brown-haired man convulsively twisted his face in sweat, asking the knight to just keep quiet or sneeze quietly. Then the brown-haired man looked forward again and said that the Alencia tree was located in the center of this forest. They saw a whole group of elves in front of them, who pulled a bow towards them. The main character frowned convulsively in sweat, not understanding how they were spotted. The blonde angrily stated that the boys had been screaming since they entered the forest, so they had been spotted. Xavier, at that moment, looked out from behind the protagonist with disdain and realized that they had been hit. At that moment, the brown-haired man gritted his teeth with a grin and said that they would solve everything. The protagonist grinned maliciously from under his brows and said that they would simply speed up the execution of their plans. The archers immediately fired their arrows if they did not leave. The knight immediately stood up to defend himself and took out his magic blade. A beam of light began to sparkle in the funnel. Xavier immediately used light beams and repelled a whole barrage of arrows. He swung his blade, and all the arrows began to fall to the ground.